The United States imports roughly 1/3 of all the lumber it consumes. 1/3. That is not a rounding error. It is a structural reality baked into how American homes get built. And almost 85% of those lumber imports come from a single country, Canada. So when the Trump administration imposed a combined 45.6% tariff on Canadian softwood lumber, stacking Section 232 national security duties on top of existing anti-dumping and countervailing measures, it did not protect American builders. It taxed them. The people paying for this tariff are not Canadian mill owners in British Columbia. They are homebuyers in Ohio, Texas, and Virginia. Economists at the Canadian Construction Association put a number on it. An additional $9,000 added to the cost of a typical new American home. $9,000. One tariff. And the American families sitting across the closing table have no idea it is there. That is what this video is about. Here is where it gets really interesting. The stated justification for the lumber tariff has always been the same. Canada unfairly subsidizes its timber industry through provincial stumpage fees, the fees loggers pay to harvest trees on public land. The United States has argued, repeatedly, that these fees are set artificially low, amounting to a government subsidy that lets Canadian lumber undercut American producers. That argument has gone to international arbitration 5 separate times. 5 times, the World Trade Organization ruled against the United States. The subsidies, arbitrators found, were either not illegal or not structured the way Washington claimed. The tariff stayed anyway. When the Commerce Department finalized anti-dumping duty rates in August 2025 at 20.56%, nearly tripling the previous rate, it did so through its own administrative review process, independent of any WTO ruling. The result is a tariff wall that exists not because it was proven justified in international law, but because Washington built it and kept building it. There is another angle that almost nobody is talking about. When Trump signed the executive order tightening lumber tariffs under Section 232 in the fall of 2025, the National Association of Home Builders issued an immediate statement. NAHB Chairman Buddy Hughes said the new tariffs would create additional headwinds for an already challenged housing market. That is a diplomatic way of saying, this is going to make the housing crisis worse. The United States was already short 4.5 million homes, according to Zillow data from mid-2025. Housing starts were falling. Mortgage rates had squeezed buyers out of the market. And then the administration added a new layer of cost to the one material that frames every wall and floors every room. Lumber futures jumped more than 14% year-to-date within weeks of the tariff announcement. Home builders responded by inserting escalation clauses into contracts, legal language that allows them to raise the final price of a home if material costs surge during construction. The buyer signs a contract. The buyer later pays more. The tariff is invisible by then. Now, here is where this starts affecting people who never thought they were anywhere near a trade war. Consider what 45.6% on softwood lumber actually means at the level of a construction project. A standard single-family home in the United States uses roughly 15,000 board feet of lumber. At pre-tariff prices, the lumber package for that house costs somewhere between $7,000 and $10,000. Add 45.6%, that number climbs by $3,000 to $4,000 on materials alone. Before the builder adds margin, before the subcontractor adds labor markup, before the developer prices and carrying costs on the land. The $9,000 figure from RBC economists accounts for the full cascade. Material cost increases, supply chain delays caused by reduced Canadian production, and the ripple effect on adjacent materials like engineered wood products and wood-based panels. Every door frame, every floor joist, every roof truss carries a piece of that tariff into the final sale price, and buyers pay it with a 30-year mortgage, with interest. But here is the problem. The tariff was supposed to redirect demand toward domestic American lumber producers. That is the theory. When Canadian wood becomes more expensive, American sawmills should capture more market share, hire more workers, and grow. That is how protection is supposed to work. The reality is more complicated. American softwood lumber production is constrained by geography and timber supply, not just price competition. The Pacific Northwest, the primary domestic production region, is dealing with decades of reduced timber harvesting on federal lands, aging mill infrastructure, and a labor shortage in logging communities. Analysts at Forest Economic Advisors projected that even with tariffs in place, domestic supply could not meaningfully fill the gap left by reduced Canadian imports before the 2026 construction season. The lumber that was not coming from Canada was not being replaced by lumber from Oregon or Washington. It was just missing. And when supply falls short of demand, prices rise, not for Canadian exporters, but for American buyers. This is where the conversation fundamentally changes. In late 2025 and into 2026, Canadian mills began closing, not pausing, closing. By early 2026, industry data tracked 22 Canadian lumber facilities that had either permanently shuttered or suspended operations indefinitely. More than 5,600 Canadian lumber workers lost their jobs. And here is the economic irony that takes a moment to absorb. Those mill closures did not help American producers. They tightened the global supply of softwood lumber. When total supply falls, regardless of which country's mills are shutting, the price of the remaining supply goes up everywhere. American builders were now paying higher prices, not just because of the tariff itself, but because the tariff had helped knock enough Canadian production offline to create a genuine supply shortage. Trump's tariff created the exact market condition it claimed to be solving. The domestic industry it was designed to protect is now operating in a tighter, more expensive market than it was before the tariff escalation began. And here is something most people missed entirely. On April 6, 2026, the United States restructured its Section 232 tariffs on steel, aluminum, and copper, expanding coverage to derivative products, meaning manufactured goods that contain these metals. That change was directed at industrial goods, but its logic is the same logic that drives the lumber tariff. Apply tariffs broadly enough, and the economic pain eventually forces a change in behavior. What changed in the lumber market is not Canadian behavior. Canadian mills did not find a way to become more competitive. They closed. What changed is the cost structure of the American housing market. When Industry Minister Melanie Joly announced a $1.5 billion Canadian government support package on May 4, 2026, loans to keep steel, aluminum, and lumber companies operational, critics on both sides of the border noted the obvious. Canada was now spending public money to keep its export industries alive so they could continue selling to an American market that was charging them nearly 46% to get in. The tariff did not stop the trade. It just made everyone involved, Canadian producers and American consumers, pay more to continue it. Here is where this lands for you. If you are an American who bought a new home in 2025 or 2026, or if you priced one and could not afford it, part of that calculation includes a tariff you were never told about. The average American household pays roughly $1,500 per year in additional costs directly attributable to Trump-era tariffs, according to a 2026 analysis by the Tax Foundation. The lumber tariff is one piece of that, but it is the piece that concentrates in the most expensive purchase most Americans will ever make. It is embedded in your mortgage. It compounds with interest over 30 years. A $9,000 cost increase at signing, financed at current rates, becomes more than $15,000 paid out over the life of a loan. That is not a trade policy statistic. That is a number with a monthly payment attached to it. The Federal Reserve's Beige Book, the report that aggregates economic conditions across all 12 regional banks, flagged lumber costs and tariff uncertainty in multiple districts in early 2026. The Richmond Fed noted it. The Kansas City Fed noted it. The San Francisco Fed noted it. These are not advocacy organizations. These are the institutions that monitor the actual mechanics of the American economy. When 4 of the 12 regional Fed banks independently flagged the same material cost pressure in the same report, the signal is not subtle. NAHB has called on the administration to enter negotiations on a new softwood lumber agreement, one that eliminates tariffs rather than escalates them. That call has been consistent for years. It has not produced a negotiation. The tariffs have instead risen from 14.5% combined before Trump's second term to roughly 40% in early 2025, to the current 45.6% combined rate under Section 232 and anti-dumping duties stacked together. So here's the question. The United States imposes a 45.6% tariff on Canadian lumber with the stated goal of protecting American industry. In the process, it adds an estimated $9,000 to the cost of a new American home, contributes to a housing supply shortage already measured in the millions of units, and closes the Canadian mills, whose production it was designed to replace. And it does all of this while the July 1, 2026 CUSMA review deadline approaches, a date that could reshape the entire trade relationship between these two countries for the next 16 years. Who is actually being protected here? Some will argue the tariffs are working exactly as intended, that the goal was never to lower lumber prices, but to use trade pressure as leverage in a broader renegotiation with Canada, and that the housing cost is simply an acceptable price of that strategy. Others will argue that when a policy designed to help American workers raises the price of the homes those workers are trying to buy, finances a portion of the lumber industry's losses through consumer debt compounded over 30 years, and still cannot produce enough domestic supply to replace what it pushed offline. That policy has failed on its own terms, not on paper, but in every new home contract signed this year. So tell me in the comments, who do you think is paying for this tariff? And if you want to see what this trade war looks like from the other side of the border, the mill towns going quiet, the government loans keeping plants open, and the Canadian workers watching their jobs disappear, we cover that on our other channel. The numbers there are just as uncomfortable